All right, are we ready to get going now? The delegation is hooked up here, so, oh, that's a nice one for Veda. There you go. Yeah. Okay, so I'd like to call this meeting to order. And I'd like to recognize that we're conducting the meeting on the traditional territories, the Hoopa First Nation, and the T-Shop First Nation, and we're grateful for that fact. I'd like to acknowledge that we're conducting the meeting on the unceded territories. Oh, I just heard that. Sorry, my laptop's being my laptop today. We are live streaming this on YouTube, are we? At Regional District Office, maybe?
It's not being live streamed. We're recording it and we'll upload it to the website after the meeting.
Okay, thank you. You were having Zoom problems, so we're on. Okay. And can they still go in? We can't go to Zoom for our questions, so we just go to ACRD at responses@acrd.pc.ca, and the Zoom one's no longer there. So we're having a few technical difficulties. After all that, we'd like to do introductions. We'll start in the room here, and I will go to my right.
Good afternoon. I'm Heather Zenner, Manager of Administrative Services.
Good afternoon. Klama Penny Cote, Electoral Area D, Sprout Lake.
And good afternoon, Planning Manager Alex Dyer.
Good afternoon, Mike Erg, General Manager of Planning and Development.
Good afternoon, I'm Daniel Sayam, the CAO for the ACRD.
Great, and we'll go online. We'll go to Veda.
Veda Siga, Director for Area C, Long Beach.
Thank you. And we'll go to Susan.
Good afternoon, Susan Roth, Beaver Creek Director.
Thank you. Fred.
Good afternoon, Fred Boyko, Electoral Area Director for Beaufort.
Thank you. And I am Mike Sparrow, Electoral Director for Cherry Creek, and I am your chair this afternoon. So next thing we're going to do is approval of agenda. Are any late items from? No? So moved by Director Cote. Do we have a second? Seconded by Director Sega. All those in favor? Opposed? And it's carried. Any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none, we'll move on to the minutes. Electoral Directors Committee meeting held February 20, 2025. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, adoption, okay. Director Cote, and seconded by Director Sega. Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Round of 5, petitions, delegations, and presentations. We have Jenny Hildebrandt, project planning, Sandy McKay, housing research and policy lead, Mokola Development Services, Andrew Scala-Dickey, manager, planning division, Turner Drake regarding the update on ACRD housing needs report, project update, implement data. So the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Great, thanks everyone. Afternoon. Thank you so much for having Jenna and myself. I will just say there's quite a bit of feedback, I think, coming in through the ACRD boardroom, Mike. So if it's possible to mute the ACRD boardroom, that would be really helpful.
Just give us 30 seconds here. We'll do that.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, it sounds like it's muted. Let me just test it. Yeah, that's working great. So, but when you have questions or if you need to raise your hands or anything like that, don't hesitate to unmute and ask something. It's just, I think for all of us online, we're getting quite a bit of echo from the room mic. Perfect. Well, thanks so much for having us. My name is Sandy Mackey, joining you today from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen, Chwepsum, and Wasonic peoples. I've got my colleague, Jenna Hildebrandt, with me as well. Together, actually, Jenna, do you want to introduce yourself and your territories?
Yes, thanks, Sandy. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenna Hildebrandt. I'm joining today from the traditional unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations here in what's now referred to as Vancouver. And excited to be here to present on the Housing Needs Report update. I had a chance to work on the interim report, so many of you folks got lots of familiar faces that I see today, and looking forward to chatting about the more fulsome update today.
Definitely. Thanks, Jenna. Yeah, so that's a great introduction to this project. We completed the interim housing needs reports as required by new provincial legislation updates in December of 2024, and now we are repeating the full housing needs report update to support some of your staff as they work through OCP updates and other policy initiatives across the ACRD. This will satisfy your full report requirements until probably the release of new census data in 2027 or 2028. I know it seems crazy that 2026 is a census year and we are just now starting to really dive into 2021 data, but that's just the lag we always deal with, unfortunately. And we'll talk a bit about how we are trying to make up for that gap and that lag, especially in rural areas with some engagement with your communities. So I'm just going to share my screen. We will jump into it. And hopefully the presentation won't take more than 8 to 10 minutes, and there'll be lots of times for questions after. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. Jenna, do you want to just give me a nod? Great, thank you. So let's jump into it. So we've introduced ourselves, but I'll introduce Macola Development Services for those of you who don't know us. We'll talk a bit about the project, present to you some additional initial data findings, and then leave lots of time at the end for questions and discussion. MDS is a nonprofit planning consulting firm dedicated to affordable housing research and policy work across British Columbia. We've got over 30 years as a market and non-market housing provider, and that includes partnerships with all levels of government, nonprofit organizations. Sorry, I think the mic in the boardroom is on again. If we could just, thank you very much. We have a full Indigenous board of directors who are responsible for the strategic direction of our organization. And we have a focus on researching, developing, and operating affordable housing across British Columbia. In the past, we've worked with the ACRD on the West Coast Housing Needs Report, and we are excited to continue our relationship with your communities. This project is going to be looking at all 6 of your electoral areas, covering the entirety of the regional district, save your municipalities. But your municipalities will have done similar projects over the past year, so there is some nice connection points that we can make use of. Our goals, obviously, we have met the new provincial requirements, but our next goal is to kind of build on those interim requirements and exceed them. We want to develop a full report, which includes comprehensive housing data on demography, incomes in your communities, costs, housing gaps, and projected need. The data that we have access to isn't perfect. So in addition to pulling everything that we can, we are going to engage with your community members. That includes a community survey, which is now active via Let's Connect ACRD, and focus groups 1 with each of your area planning committees. We've already conducted 2, and we've got 4 more in the calendar for the next 2 or 3 weeks. That helps us identify gaps in the data and account for rural contexts and seasonal populations. As we work through some of this interim data, you'll see that what we have access to is not perfect, especially for rural communities. So working with community members to identify real needs and real gaps is very important to our research. Finally, we will end the project with some key findings and recommendations. This will include key and current projected housing issues, as well as some recommended policy approaches that are within the scope of regional government for your staff. That's a really important part of this. We want to make sure that we're giving you tools to use that are within your power as a regional government. So jumping into some of our preliminary findings. One of the first places we start in a housing needs report is taking a look at population. So in 2016, in the blue, that is your populations as of that last census data point. And what we've got is some projected, and then so the orange is showing you how it changed between the 2 census periods. So some municipalities went up by, as little as 2, or some electorals went up by as little as 2%, like Cherry Creek, and others increased pretty dramatically, a 30% change in Long Beach, 14% change in Sprout Lake, 19% change in Beaufort, and a 6% change in Bamfield. So some growth across the board in those electoral areas. But obviously this is not even growth. Some are growing faster than others. But when we look at our projected growth on this next graph, this is showing 2021 in blue now, and the change over the next 20 years projected between 2021 and 2041. You might notice that these have been applied relatively evenly. So it's about a 15% change across each one. Unfortunately, the projection methodology that we have access to through the government of British Columbia only applies a blanket number to the entire ACRD. So they're saying that we expect the ACRD to grow by about 15% over the next 20 years. And so what you're seeing is just an even application of that 15% across the electoral areas. This is to align with something we'll talk about later, which is the H&R projection methodology that projects households. And that's something that we have to use as per H&R legislation. However, we do have some freedom to adjust this projection, and that's something that our team is planning to do. We kind of are using this 15% indicator as a barometer. So we present this out to your communities. They tell us whether or not they feel that is something that makes sense. And then we take that back and develop our own methodology to adjust and apply a more accurate projection moving forward for each of these electoral areas. So we're seeing that within BC province's projections, Beaver Creek will continue to be the largest electoral area, probably around 3,400 people by 2041. And your other electoral areas will continue to grow by about 15-ish% to each one. And obviously, we will include this data point because it is something that's required for housing needs reports, but we will likely give you a more nuanced projection approach as well that includes and integrates feedback from communities that we speak to. Projection of population is important, and especially age of population is important because it starts to have meaningful impacts on the type of housing that we need to be building to meet needs in our communities. So this graph is showing you the anticipated population change by age group between 2021 and 2041. Unfortunately, we don't have disaggregated data per electoral area. We only have it for the ACRD as a whole. But generally, what we're seeing are larger increases in the 25 to 44-year-old category, as well as the 65 plus category, growing approximately 40% and about 30% respectively. Some notable decreases in the 45 to 64-year-old category. Typically, as that category ages, they're aging into the 65 plus. So more of those seniors aging into 65 plus than there are being replaced from that 25 to 44-year-old category. This is a pretty common age distribution across the rural areas of British Columbia. And actually, I would say that your growth in the 25 to 44-year-old category is likely a bit higher than we've seen in some other rural areas. In many places, those 25 to 44-year-olds are not growing nearly as fast as maybe we would be seeing here. But what this means is, broadly, your population is aging. And that has some real implications for the types of housing you need to be considering when you're looking at permitting and things like that. Another key indicator we always look at is income. Unfortunately, there is no data available for Banfield, just too small to get realistic income data. Income is part of the long form census, and with a only 1 in 4 sample size, that population is just too small for them to pull meaningful data. However, we do have access to income data for the rest of your electoral areas, all of which are sitting around that $80,000 mark for a median household income. What you might notice is the fairly significant percentage increases between 2016 and 2021, between the last two census periods. In 2021, when we collected census data, we collected income data based on your previous tax year, so the year 2020. 2020 was the year of significant COVID-related benefits and other support systems from the federal and provincial governments. We suspect that that has led to an artificial inflation of incomes, especially in some of the lower income brackets, that will likely have returned to normal once those benefits elapsed. So we would expect to see that some of these numbers might normalize during the next census, but right now this is the best data we have to work with. And with some caveats, we feel like it's reasonably accurate still. So the median income around $80,000 in your communities, and that obviously differs by type of household and things like that, but this is the median household income in 2021. Another key stat that we look at is the share of usual versus non-usual residents. So a usual residence it's their permanent home versus a non-usual occupant would be someone who's using a property temporarily or as a vacation home. You've got a fairly significant percentage of non-usual resident occupied dwellings in the ACRD. In Banfield in 2021, we saw that only about a quarter of respondents who completed the census were permanent residents of that community, and nearly 75% were temporary or seasonal residents, which is pretty dramatic. We expect that as COVID has sort of changed our movement patterns again, and we're in that squarely in that post-COVID period, we would expect that number of usual residents to tick up. But it really does show you how many of your residents are seasonal or there for short periods of the year, not the full year. One thing that we are looking at is using this data to help your staff make decisions about servicing and other infrastructure challenges. And we're also looking at potential other sources of private data that gives us a better handle on these unusual resident occupied dwellings. I know that Tofino and Ucluelet have also done some pretty significant work trying to track their seasonal populations. So this is not a problem that you're solving on your own. This is something that we are going to work at more consistently and will be informed by the data from your community as well. Now we get into the fun stuff. So now we've kind of got a baseline data set of who is living in your communities and what types of housing they're living in. We can start using all of those things and combining different indicators to show meaningful housing narratives. So this is a really great chart that shows you in blue the price of the median home in the ACRD between 2012 and 2022. This means that half of homes were sold for higher than this blue line, and half of homes were sold for a lower amount than that blue line. But generally, a pretty significant and steep increase beginning in about 2015, 2016 to a high into 2022. We expect that though there won't be similar increases between 2022 and 2023 and 2023 and 2024, as there was between 21 and 22, they're still going to be going up, not maybe not quite as dramatically, but certainly have not leveled off or decreased in those intervening 2 years. The other lines show with some basic mortgage assumptions what this type of family could afford to purchase based on some really basic mortgage assumptions. So a couple who typically has the highest earning and purchasing power of all the different household types tracked by the census could afford to purchase, a home that was about $300,000 in 2021 or 2022, whereas the median home cost about $900,000 in 2021, 2022. So a really significant gap there. Other household types like lone parents and single persons, truly the median home is out of reach for them and has been for quite a long time. We also have pretty good data on the rental market, though unfortunately only in Port Alberni. CMHC, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, tracks rental data for communities over 10,000 people only. But generally, we have seen that information for a city like Port Alberni is pretty relevant to other communities that surround it. And what this shows is that your local vacancy rate, which dropped below 3% in about 2015, has been below that healthy vacancy range for about the last 10 years. Healthy vacancy rate is usually between 3 and 5%. That means that there is enough competition to keep prices low, but enough interest that people are still interested in renting out their homes, especially in the secondary market. This shows that there is a lot of competition, not a ton of availability, and that likely means that prices are going up, not down. The final kind of key indicator I'll talk about is core housing need. Core housing need is a catch-all statistic. It is designed to capture whether or not a household is in any of these three need categories. The first is, does the house need major repairs? The second, does it cost more than 30% of your before tax income? And the third, does it have enough bedrooms for the size and composition of occupants? So is it in bad condition? Is it too expensive, or is it overcrowded? In your electoral areas, Long Beach has the highest rates of core housing need, 30% of owners in core housing need, largely driven by condition and affordability, and 25% of renters in core housing need, almost exclusively driven by affordability. Some other areas, we unfortunately do not have enough data to make a meaningful statistical representation of core housing needs. But in Beaver Creek and Cherry Creek, we're seeing that owners have a far lower rate of core housing need than renters. And this is normal across the province. The Long Beach outlier for renters in core housing need is is definitely something we only see in a few places, and typically it is driven by folks who are overextending themselves financially to get into an ownership position. Usually it means that they're paying well over 40% of their income towards their mortgage and other housing expenses. So the last thing I'll talk about is this housing need report methodology that we're required to use by the province. It's a standardized method to project housing need that accounts for current demand. So the backlog that we've is like current need, projected demand based on the number of new residents that they're expecting, and a demand buffer. Basically, they're saying that it's not enough to simply meet demand. We actually need to overbuild with additional units in order to restore balance and improve affordability back to, they're basically saying, pre-2016 levels. Showing here that your electoral areas are expected to need an additional about 1,200 homes by the year 2041, spread out across the electoral areas, sort of 50 in Bamfield, about 80 in Beaufort, 113 in Long Beach, almost 300 in Sprout Lake, closer to 400 in Beaver Creek, and about 300 in Cherry Creek. Now, this is basically saying this is, in municipalities, they actually have to start zoning for this demand. In electoral areas, it's more informational. You don't have a legal requirement to zone for these additional units, but it is helpful to get a sense of the potential demand that your staff will need to accommodate, both through different types of zoning tools, as well as it's really important for servicing and infrastructure capacity and thinking about those on a 20-year time frame. And then finally, the distribution of that projected demand. We are expecting to see that about 75%, about 3/4 of that new demand is going to be met, or likely to be met through options priced at about market price. About 20% or 18% probably met at a below market rate, and about 10% met at a deeply affordable rate. Typically, deeply affordable is tied to the shelter rate of income assistance, which in British Columbia is about $500 a month. So it's folks who are on some sort of government assistance. Largely, these are single seniors who are on fixed incomes. Below market units are typically priced at 25% lower than what a market rate is, which is basically just a subsidized rental option. And then market housing is priced at basically what the market can bear. It depends on different communities have different market rental rates. And we figured this out by looking at, we're able to see rates of core housing need across the different income brackets. And so that gives us an ability to see like where housing need is the highest and what percentage of folks can afford to pay what amounts and how do those relate to the varying definitions of affordable housing that we have in British Columbia. And then finally, distribution of demand by bedroom type. Typically in aging communities, we see a larger demand for studios and one-bedroom units, and that's no different here in the ACRD. About 40% of projected new demand will be for studios and one bedrooms. Two bedrooms account for about 1/4 of the demand, 20% for 3 bedrooms, and about 16% in larger homes. Your current stock is largely, single detached housing. So a lot of the redistribution of those units as folks age will be something to kind of play into this math. And obviously none of this is perfect, right? This is something that your staff can take as information and use to craft more nuanced policies. It's not something that's going to necessarily drive development outcomes over the next 20 years. So that's it. Our next steps for this project, we'll be conducting our additional focus groups with APCs. We are closing the survey on May 2nd. So please forward it to any interested residents that you can think of. It's currently available on Let's Connect ACRD. And then we'll be developing the report, including our key findings and recommendations for presentation back to you again in summer of 2025. That's it. I'll open the floor for any questions you might have.
Hand up or physically put our hand up, I guess. Right now we're our first crack team, so maybe a little bit lumpy here. Any questions from directors? Director Boyko has a question. Go ahead.
Do you see my hand raised up in the corner or no? Okay. Just want to make sure everything's going that way. Usually it works pretty good. Can you go to the graph that has median income over the past 2016, 2021?
You got it. Just give me 1 second. Apologies, I closed that screen. Median income.
If you want, I can
Okay,
tell you
got
which
it.
page is on. Okay.
I got there.
So I find it very interesting that, okay, so Banfield has no data. Beaufort's gone up. Long Beach has gone up quite a bit. Beaver Creek, Cherry Creek. Spruce Lake's at 0.
Yeah.
So I wonder why that is, but if that's actually true data, the Spruce Lake taxpayer is going to be hurting with their taxes going up and their income not going up like everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to keep in mind is that's the median income. So 50% of people still earn less than that, and 50% of people earn more. So just because the middle point hasn't really changed doesn't mean there's been a lot of redistribution around that point. So many people still will have had their incomes go up, and others will have had their incomes go down. And this is from 2020, so a lot has changed in the past 5 years in terms of, the way, you know, the way everyone has been getting paid feels like it's been changing quite a lot with cost of living bonuses and the rates of inflation and things like that. So I wouldn't necessarily use this Census Canada data to inform your local policy and taxation decisions. I would instead focus on what you're hearing from your residents, especially for something like taxation, right? If they are receiving more services, folks are often fine with paying additional taxes. I say that someone who's not a politician, but this is just one data point, and whenever we're making a decision about policy, we're using as many different data points as possible and not over relying on one, especially in a rural community where these values can often not be perfectly represented in reality. This is only a 1/4 sample, so.
Perfect. Thank you. I got 2 more questions if that's okay, Chair.
Yeah.
Can you go down to the next page?
Yeah.
Where did this data come from?
It is from the census.
So this is like, I am a home owner living in my house as opposed to I'm a rental person living in a house. That kind of question?
It would be even more nuanced than that. So it does ask renter or owner. That is something that's on there. But this would be more specific. Is this your usual place of residence, or do you have another usual place of residence? So it's designed to account for the folks who are not permanently living at the address they fill out the census in.
Thank you. Can you go down 2 more slides? The rental market. So you mentioned the secondary market. Are you talking about things like Airbnb, VRBO, et cetera, like that?
So the secondary
And-
market does not include. Oh, sorry. Go finish your question, then I'll jump in. Sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
So yeah, there are 3 different kind of types of rental markets. There's the primary rental market, the secondary rental market, and the short-term rental market. So the primary rental market is what's being tracked here. This is what CMHC looks at. It's typically purpose-built rental buildings with more than 4 units. And so, in a place like Port Alberni, we're lucky to have data at all, but that doesn't account for most of the rental units within Port Alberni. Most of the rental units are in the secondary market. So to track secondary market data, we actually rely on, sometimes we do secondary market scans where we're scanning Facebook and the other rental sites regularly to look at pricing. Other times we rely on local actors. So for a while, the West Coast Resources Society had a staff member who every month was going online and actually looking at what rentals were in Ucluelet and Tofino. We were able to use that for the West Coast study in 2020, which is really helpful. But generally, the secondary market is difficult to track, and what we do find is usually point in time. It's not something that can be reliably sort of spread across to draw trends, unlike the CMHC data, which has this extremely regular collection methodology that we can compare across years. The short-term rental market, which is VRBO, Airbnb, things like that, do not count as in the secondary or primary market. They're tracked separately. There are tools available to help us track those. And there are things like host compliance, which is what places like Tofino use to actually ensure that the hosts in their communities are paying the appropriate business licensing and taxes and things like that. but that would not show up here. This is just primary market rental.
Thank you very much. And that's a great explanation. I think a lot of the other directors would benefit from what you just said, that this is only multi-unit apartments in Port
Yes.
Alberni and not very reflective of the entire valley, because that's a very low percentage of the actual renters and does not apply basically to any of the electoral areas.
Correct.
Perfect. And just so you know, I think Tofino is repealing their short-term rental legislation, but
Yeah.
I don't want to talk on their behalf. Thank you very much.
No worries. Yeah, I do get I get a ding every time any news comes up about housing in the ACRD. So Jen and I were definitely talking about that. Yes, exactly what you're saying. This is primary market rental data for Port Alberni, not super reflective of the actual rental stock in your communities. However, the trends in the primary rental market generally reflect the trends we see in the secondary market in neighboring communities. So low vacancy rates, high prices, lots of competition for units. That is something that we can expand across.
Okay, thank you, Director Boyker. You're done. I'm going to go to Director Cote.
Thank you. So on page 21, there's a graph showing core housing need, and Sprout Lake has got 3%, and it's total. No statistics data for owner or renter. Was it just too hard to get? And then there's a projected of 5 years and 20 years of needing 125 units and almost 320 years. So it doesn't really give me a lot to look at.
Yes, you are absolutely correct. There is not a lot to look at. So when we start getting into things like core housing need, we're starting to look from the short-term census or short-form census, which everyone fills out, into the long-form census, which only 1/4 of households fill out. So now we're going from the whole population to only 1/4 of the population. Then we break that down further into renters and owners. And in smaller communities, the more granular we get with the data from the long form, the less and less likely it is to be statistically representative of the community as a whole. That's just one of the challenges that we have to work with in the sort of the data sciences part of this. So when things get to a point where they are not statistically reliable, Census Canada does something called suppression. So as you can see on Banfield, we've actually written suppression here. Suppressed for B and D, it was only partially suppressed. So we were able to get access to the whole core housing need number, but not the number of renters and owners. So unfortunately, we don't have access to a more in-depth or granular data than just the broad number of households in core housing need. What we can say is that, only a small percentage of Sprout Lake is likely to be in core housing need, just given kind of the nature of that community. I think that's probably representative. But yes, again, not perfect. And that's why we always pair this data with in-depth conversations with your staff about what they see on a day-to-day basis in those communities and some of the trends that they're projecting. And then 2, community engagement data. That is a big reason why we're doing community engagement as part of this, is because we know that this data is not necessarily reliable in small and rural communities. So we're doing our best to counter that suppression where we can, but it is something we unfortunately, just the reality of data collection in small communities. Now for, I believe this one you were talking about, looking at the anticipated demand by over the next 20 years. Those are some big numbers probably that you're seeing there. And, unfortunately, the province has given us a projection methodology that we are required to use in order to meet the new legislation. That means that it is the same methodology for Vancouver as it is for Sprout Lake. And, that's good in some ways. It means we're all being judged by the same kind of numbers and progress. But it's bad in other ways in that, like, these are totally different worlds. They're worlds apart, right? And a projection methodology that, is applied to both is likely not going to work perfectly in either. So they have said that, for electoral areas, this is not meant to be something that you are now building your policies explicitly around. It's meant for information for staff. Whereas in municipalities, there is a more rigorous requirement to actually zone for that number of projected units in place. Does that answer your question, hopefully?
Just goes to show that I don't have the data here to make a decision. Feel that there's a lot of missing pieces. Mandates coming from the province to with a formula that we're supposed to use, but yet the data isn't here. So you've answered. Thank you.
In the report, we will go into the specifics of how these are calculated, and we'll break out how each of the different pieces that go into that number are determined. But yes, it is not going to be perfect, and there's never going to be a satisfying answer for you, unfortunately. That's just the way this works. But the other good news is that we're only just at the halfway point of this study. We still have all of the community engagement data to integrate. We still have the full housing need report to come. So there will be more for you to go on than just this PowerPoint, I promise.
Now I have Director Roth.
Thank you. So to me, this feels like the cart before the horse for Beaver Creek. And right now, Beaver Creek is wanting to reestablish or establish source water and adding advanced water treatment. And that would need to happen before any significant increase in density. So can you include that concern or that information in your report too? And maybe we can even tie it to other things.
100%. I think that's the reason why your staff are doing this work as part of other projects, is that it really does feed into your conversations about infrastructure and long-term planning and growth management. In rural areas especially, planning for housing need isn't about building homes. It's more about infrastructure management, long-term planning, and growth management than it is about actually building the units, right? Because probably BC Housing isn't going to drop in and build a 50-unit apartment building, right? That's not really how this works. It's more about incremental progress towards these goals through the tools that you have in your toolkit.
One other point, if I may, it could also mean something like if we were going to build a new fire department, we could look at it differently and maybe include some housing needs there or something like that. Okay,
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, a very common approach, actually. There's more where I live in Victoria. We just had our new fire hall is under about 6 stories of affordable housing. We're helping Squamish build some housing on top of their fire hall. And we're seeing a lot of interesting co-location of uses, community amenities with some affordable housing. And in rural areas, that's really, taking off as a way of, decreasing your infrastructure burden and increasing some of the assets in your communities.
Yeah, and also, they can protect each other.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the
Thank
fire
you.
hall is protecting the housing. I'm not sure the housing is protecting the fire hall, but yeah.
Thanks.
I now have Director Boyko.
Thank you very much. I just got a quick follow-up. I'm sure the people that are living above the fire hall are enjoying the sirens all times of the night as well. That being said, the graph that you have right now, or the housing demand, I do agree with Director Cote, as in we have some information, but it's missing a whole bunch for us to actually make it useful.
Yep.
By next year, we're supposed to have 33 houses built in Beaufort. And I would say there's probably been, in the past 5 years, there's probably been 3 or 4. So the projections coming out from the province are wholly unrealistic. And why do we even bother using them if they're out by orders of magnitude? And if we're supposed to have 84 more out here, that's never going to happen. So I question the numbers and the formula we have to use, because it's not attainable, it's unrealistic, and this almost seems like a waste of time. But thank you.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that the formula that you're being asked to use does have some pretty significant drawbacks, especially in rural areas. And that's one of the reasons why they aren't demanding that you immediately turn around and zone for these projected new units, right? I will say that this 5-year gap, so 2021 to 2026, that 33 units accounts for not just the projected new growth, but the existing gap in your community. So the folks that haven't been able to form a new household because of affordability concerns, the folks that are currently in a core housing needs situation or living in an underhoused situation because they can't get access to a unit, right? So it's not just about projected new population and growth, it's about meeting the current needs in your community too. So, I mean, I think probably you can think of a couple of people in Beaufort who are actively looking for a rental unit and can't find one. That fact that the market isn't necessarily like building to that demand is a sign that, you know, there's other bigger things at play here, right? And none of this is necessarily in your power to solve at a regional district level. So we can help point you to the tools that you do have access to and that you can use. But in certain cases, you're right. It's not going to be. We don't have great solutions a lot of the time, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay, and now I have Mike Erg.
And I wanted to just highlight a couple things, especially about this graph. So this was something the province mandated we had to do, and Macola did the work so that we could meet the provincial requirements. And then also when we looked at it as staff and had initial conversations with directors and the community that was involved with that, recognized that there was gaps. So Director Boyko, you'd mentioned about Beaufort, but in contrast, Bamfield, has significant demand is what we're hearing from the residents, and which is why we wanted to do this additional work that will then inform the OCPs that we're doing. So we have a better handle on each area, on what they would need and how to develop those long-term policies specifically around housing. And when you look at the differences between Bamfield, Long Beach, and Sprout Lake as far as ownership and non-resident ownership, and more of it's residential but also vacation areas, as opposed to Beaufort, Beaver Creek, and Cherry Creek are more predominantly residential, but we're using one methodology that applies to the whole province to calculate these, and really being able to dig down on what's needed in each electoral area, so that we're able to provide the best informed decisions when we move through our OCPs and go back to the community, and then as directors when those OCPs come to the board, and make the decisions so that we can have things that are appropriate in Bamfield and Sprout Lake and Long Beach, and some of those policies may be different and should probably be different in Cherry Creek, Beaver Creek, and Beaufort because of the differences in the community makeup and the ownership of the properties. So I think this is like Sandy mentioned, this is the first half, and really getting to the second half will be more information, more data, and also informed through the surveys and the feedback from the advisory planning commissions. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Okay, now I have some questions. As everybody else has done there. It's good. So the core housing needs for Cherry Creek, the rental is 27%. It says there on page 21. I believe that peak actually up there. The other part about it is, looking back, we have the lowest median costing up to $77,000 in 2020, I believe. We have $74,000. Great. So one of the problems we have in Cherry Creek is we have a lot of ALR land, which is a government regulated thing. We have a independent water board, fire department, which connects in their lines, which is a provincial government mandate. And then we have a housing needs, which is also a provincial mandate. So two sides are stopping us and one side wants us to go. And we have the lowest income to do it with. On top of that, the water board put the taxes up in Cherry Creek 60%, the tolls up 40%, and probably the fire department up 50%. So I don't think we're going to make these numbers unless a miracle happens, because everything's going against us right now. So is your report going to reflect any of these other problems we have with independent boards that are influencing our tax base and causing other issues, or just going to be a housing report and hope we make it?
It's a good question. We are certainly going to be cataloging the other issues that you're seeing in your communities because they are related to housing. So servicing, infrastructure, increased taxation, all of those things are going to are going to probably prevent some of the growth that is being projected by the province. So remember that the province is always looking at, when they do these projections, it's always the past census periods. It's none of the forward census periods. So if you're now butting up against your carrying capacity as a community, there's probably going to be some lessening in the demand moving forward. So we are going to repeat the 20-year projection every 5 years moving forward. And every 5 years it will change based on what we've seen in this current 5 years. So if because of housing and servicing and taxation issues, your growth has lessened, that will be then displayed in the 20-year projection when we do the next report. So, I mean, I don't expect that you're going to be actually adding those 290 units unless we see some remarkable changes in building technology and our ways to service folks more efficiently. Probably what will happen is, if you're at your carrying capacity, demand will decrease. We'll see some densification in certain areas. We'll see an increase in things like secondary suites and some like modest density, but we won't be seeing these like vast subdivisioning expansions because it's probably not great planning practice, and your staff know that and are working towards those things. But we will catalog all those issues because I think that they can provide nuance and color to some of these like very black and white numbers that kind of don't make any sense on the page, right? We will ideally give you, the more fulsome story, and that will help you kind of soften that 292 projection or change the way it maybe drops into the minds of your community members.
Okay, thank you. One thing I remembered is as we grew as a area in Cherry Creek, people decided to join the city because they have better services, and we've lost population again too. So if we start building up close to the city occasionally, we become part of the city, and that's the choice of people that live there. So that happens. So yeah, we can go down too.
Definitely, and that's like that's part of what growth management planning is, right? Is deciding, when to. I mean, yeah, being part of the city is different that's like maybe a different decision, but your staff can work with the city to, designate areas for densification and more significant growth while doing things like protecting your ALR land or recognizing that the ALR land can't just be opened up for development, right? So yeah, that's a big part of what this data will inform.
Good, thank you for that. I see Director Roth has a question.
Thank you. Just a curiosity. Do you know if BC Housing will build housing in electoral areas, or do they just do it in municipalities?
It really depends. It's a good question. We have seen examples of BC Housing building housing in electoral areas. We're working on some projects in the interior right now that are in fairly small rural communities. And they do have a mandate to support smaller and more kind of remote or removed areas of our province, in addition to big projects in the Lower Mainland and Victoria. However, they won't be building projects that can't be serviced adequately for at least a period of, X amount of years. When we build BC housing units, we are building a public asset that is meant to last for generations of community members. It's not meant to last for, 20 years. It's meant to last for 50, 60, 100 years in some cases. So if we can't have, guaranteed servicing and infrastructure commitments, or if it represents bad planning practice to be expanding in certain areas when really we shouldn't be promoting tons of density in this area that can't support it, then they won't be building those, no. So there is a lot of decisions that go into it, but if say a Bamfield, for example, with its kind of smaller core, decided to put up land and had a plan in place to service that land and to operate those units longitudinally, it's certainly something that would be considered by BC Housing.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions from Director Cote?
Stop a candy in my mouth. Page 24, it talks about market housing, below market, and deeply affordable.
Mhm.
Is there any way to put into that short-term rental also? Because that's one area that's really needed at Sprout Lake, and that would open up a lot of the market housing.
So you're saying like the that seasonal population, it has to go somewhere, right? Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't thought about it that way. These three categories represent broadly sort of the way that we look at developing new units in British Columbia. So market units are ones developed by private actors and that are sold, rented, purchased on the market at market rates. And then below market and deeply affordable are sort of subsidized options that we see usually developed through government entities. Short-term rentals, I see what you mean, could definitely impact this model. I think we would struggle to build it into this specific graph, but it's certainly something that we can speak to in that report, that additional short-term units. I think you're probably thinking of like hotel stays and like short rental stays, kind of things can open up space in the permanent rental and permanent ownership market. Yeah, we can definitely provide some of that information, because I do think Sport Lake is kind of unique in that regard with the lakefront properties and lots of rentals and summertime seasonality.
When you look at the amount of people that live there full time, we've used 50% absentee owners as a number for a lot of years. A lot of those homes are rented, and they're quite unaffordable. So people buy them, and they'll buy multiple houses and rent them out short term, just because of the income that they can get from them. But if that was to change, there would be a lot of actual housing made available that could be part of those numbers.
Yeah, we can talk about some of the new policy approaches to short-term rentals that have gone in place in British Columbia. So, I mean, there is the ability to opt in to some of the government's short-term rental regulation. As you know, we talked about earlier, Tofino is opting out, but there is an opportunity to opt in. It basically restricts short-term rentals to your primary home, right? So you can rent out a unit in your primary home, but you can't be renting out multiple units. That might be a policy approach that you could consider. It would be very hard to police in a rural area, I think, and with existing staff resources, but it is a tool that is available to you. And I think we can definitely make a comment on short-term rentals and how they impact housing demand in Sprout Lake for sure.
So I'm seeing right now that one of the areas that did build more affordable housing is actually, a couple of them are short-term vacation rentals. They bought them for that specific, when really it was built to be more affordable housing option. So when you're in a recreational area like Sprout Lake or Long Beach or Banfield, we're going to be facing that every time. Mm-hmm. Hotels, that type of accommodation, I think needs to be part of this plan going forward, so that we can open up some of that housing. And as we build it for affordable housing, that it remains affordable housing and not these rentals that people are buying just for an income. So thanks.
Oh. And now I have Director Boyko.
Thank you. I just have one quick question for Mike. Since we're talking about short-term rentals, are we still, as ACRD, are we still paying for active, a company to actively search for short-term rentals online to check if they have permits? Is that still ongoing, or have we stopped that? Thank you.
We don't do that, and we never have done that.
Thank you very much.
I see none. So with that, I thank you for the housing needs report.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate the time today, and looking forward to having this conversation again with some greater detail later this summer. And then hopefully I'll see a few of you at the APC meetings coming up. Look forward to it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right. So we have no correspondence for action, no requests for decisions. And we're down to reports, discussion on planning application, electoral area services meetings by Alex.
I'm just going to introduce it and then turn it over to Alex.
Okay, thank you.
So as we're undertaking the review of our procedures bylaw, at our March 12th committee of the whole meeting, Director Sparrow asked a question about reviewing planning applications at electoral area director meetings rather than at the board meetings. This could allow for, more of an in-depth discussion between the electoral areas who really care and vote on these matters. So myself and Alex have done a bit of work, background work, to look at what other regional districts do. And Alex has some slides that I'm going to bring up to sort of help guide this discussion with you today. We just want to highlight some of the things that we're thinking about and really want to engage you on a discussion on what you're hoping for. So I will bring up the presentation and I'll turn it over to Alex.
Thank you, everybody. I'll just wait for Heather to bring it up. She stole my intro, so thank you for that, Heather. But as she noted, we have been looking into options. This is a practice that other regional districts do follow here on the island in varying forms, and we'll highlight some of those options for you. And I just wanted to highlight, once we get to the right slide here, I'll highlight the types of applications that we're talking about. So the applications under Part 14 of the Local Government Act, which are the rezonings, the OCP amendments, the variances, the temporary use permits. Those are all the participants in that service are the electoral area directors. More technical difficulties for those offline, but hey, there we go. We got big. So those Part 14 applications, those are the electoral area directors that do participate in that. Some nuances to that: the electoral areas and Tofino will participate in those rural planning matters that affect Clackamas Sound. So the areas within the Clackamas biosphere north of Tofino, the district of Tofino will have a vote on those matters as well. And then all of the board directors will participate in regional planning matters, which are the provincial referrals that we have, whether that be subdivision applications or agricultural land reserve applications. The regional planning service also looks after the agricultural initiatives and the ag plan implementations that we have, and the climate action initiatives as well. So for the electoral area directors in 2024, there were 123 rural planning items that were discussed at the board meeting. So about an average of 10 a month, which is a pretty active service. So when we look at the options for dealing with these, there is an opportunity to look at focusing that discussion at an electoral area directors committee meeting, like we're having right now. Many of the other regional districts on the island will do this. Those will hold, they will typically hold EA directors meetings monthly. So the opportunities presented by this format include the ability to provide more space and more time on the agenda to allow for a more fulsome discussion on planning matters, and that would be directed at the EA directors meeting rather than the board meeting. It also allows for delegations from the public. So where we have a public notice that will go out on a variance application, for example, we'll invite the public to speak to the board if they have any concerns. This will allow that space to do that at an EA directors meeting rather than the board meeting, with the goal to streamline the regular board meetings, where all of the matters are discussed and not just at the planning matters. So focusing that discussion will help streamline, particularly if the board considers incorporating a consent agenda. So where the board would consider certain planning item resolutions as a block, where recommended by the EA directors, and all of the different regional districts have a different model for doing that. The challenges faced with this model, the biggest challenge that we see would be impacting the timelines for planning applications. So the goal would not be to administratively hold up the application process by introducing new meetings and additional meetings throughout the year. That would not be our goal. It also results in additional EA directors meetings. So there would be, there are 20 board meetings a year where the board will discuss planning matters, and only 4 regularly scheduled EA directors meetings. So either that moves to more EA meetings, or we would need to hold up applications to wait for that process. So those go hand in hand together. The other option, or the other challenge, I guess, with focusing the discussion at the EA directors meetings is that whether that's the recommendations are reviewed individually for each application or as a block as part of a consent agenda, it will limit further discussion at the board table. So if the intent is to move the discussion to the EA directors, when we get to the regular board table, there would be less room for discussion, whether that be with the municipal directors and the First Nation directors that are participating, or with the EA directors that want to have another look at those recommendations. So the last slide, I'll walk you through. It's a little confusing. I just set up some simple timelines for how the board reviews rezoning applications. So option 1 there will typically take a rezoning application to an APC meeting. They'll make a recommendation. We take that to the board a first time. The board would review the staff report, would consider moving it to the public input process. If we did that, we would complete the public input process, bring it back to the board a second time, where the board would consider it for first, second, and third readings. This is a type of application that would be a residential development that would not have a public hearing, is the example we're using. The board would receive all the public input at that meeting, decide whether to move ahead with first, second, third readings, and then at a subsequent meeting, so at a third meeting, the board would consider it for adoption. So introducing the discussion of the EA directors, you can see in option 2 there, that introduces another meeting ahead of that first consideration. So different regional districts will do that in different ways. I know the Comox Valley Regional District will hold the EA directors meeting the day before the board meeting. So they will have the board agenda will be published with suggested recommendations or possible motions. And then the EA directors will consider it the day before at their specific meeting, and then those recommendations will be brought forward verbally at the board meeting the next day. So it wouldn't hold the overall process up. The planning applications would be reviewed at the same speed, I guess, that they were looked at before, but it would introduce an additional meeting for the directors. And then option 3, very similar format, but that could be where we introduce some of the recommendations as part of a consent agenda. So the EA directors would look at it at the first meeting. And then when we get into the board meetings, whether that be all 3 of them or certain, the first time that the board considers a bylaw, it can look at it individually, and then the additional readings could be by consent or vice versa. And at any time, the board can pull items out of the consent agenda and have more discussion about it. So it gets a little bit more complicated to manage in that way, but it could, if the discussion is happening at the EA directors, it could streamline how the decisions are made at the board table. So hopefully that's not too much information for you, but happy to have a bit of a discussion and answer some questions on it. We are still looking into the best model, I think, for it. It seems like every regional district has their own unique way of doing it, and I know we've reached out to our colleagues and are waiting to hear back for some options, but I think it's worth exploring, and yeah, happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you for that. I will go with Director Roth and then Director Boyko.
Thank you. I have 2 concerns making a change to this. Mostly, if we're having them at night or after work, that's not so bad, but I don't like the idea of adding another day or missing another day of work. That's why I wouldn't want to change. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. Director Boyko.
Thank you. I share that concern, but I got 3 other concerns as well. Or one good thing is we can have informed, increased focused discussions on whatever item is out there amongst ourselves. And we don't have to worry about the city people and the people that are unaffected by this sitting in the meeting and twiddling their thumbs while we're doing it and then getting anxious that we're all wasting their times. My concern is we've added another step and we will slow down the process no matter how we do this. And I've never heard of any applicant, myself included, complain that things are going too fast at the ACRD. So if someone's going to do a subdivision or rezoning or anything, it takes months and years. And any step we add to that, we have to figure out a way to make it more efficient, or else we're going to continue to drive business away from this valley. Second thing, how are we going to vote when right now we need the city, First Nations, and other people to create quorum? And that's why we do it in the meeting and require those people to be there. Are we just going to say, hey, we had a meeting and this is our recommendation, and then our vote doesn't mean anything? Or how are we going to get around that step? Thank you.
Okay, I'll let Heather answer that one.
Yeah. So, sorry, is your question directed to voting at the EA meeting or the board meeting?
Have an application come to us, and we are going to discuss it and vote on it at an EA director meeting. Is that vote worthwhile, or is it useless because we do not have quorum because the other 8 people on the board are not in that meeting? Thank you.
Yeah, so at the electoral area directors committee meeting, you are each have one vote. So you need quorum for your committee. You're making a recommendation to the board. Then the actual decision happens at the board meeting. So you would need the quorum of the board.
So this would just be adding an extra meeting in advance of our normal meetings to have further discussion and save time in the other meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, I see where we're trying to go with this. Thank you. I'll let other people.
I'll let Daniel answer that. Hold on.
So I just want to expand a bit on the consent agenda, right? So the closest approximation to that we have right now in our board meetings is correspondence for information. You have a list of correspondence for information that's there with a single motion that the board of directors receive the information. Now, the board of directors can pull anything out for more discussion if they want, but you know, typically you move a single motion, everything's received, and off you go. And the intent of this in a similar way would be to maximize the discussion at an EA director's level. And then when it gets to the board, even though they are the formal body to really endorse it, we wouldn't be expecting very many of those items to be pulled out. They would just be moved under a single resolution as a block. So things that can take somewhere up to an hour right now on planning discussions with a group of board members having no voice but just staying on for quorum, that would be hopefully minimized to something as quick as a few minutes because the EA directors would have already discussed it. So it's a trade-off, really. Yes, it's an extra meeting, but one would argue that it makes our board meetings quicker, and thus we can add other items to fill that space or just have a quicker meeting.
Thank you very much for that explanation. That makes a bit more sense. And if we're looking at moving these meetings into the evening and recording votes that will take more time, that kind of nullifies all those arguments. Appreciate it.
And now I have Director Cote.
Thank you. A couple of things here. Number one, right off the top, I'm opposed to moving the meetings to the evening. We moved them from the evening to the daytime for a reason. So I would have to be convinced that this is a right thing to do right off the bat, because we're not doing that now. I know there's a conversation around that, but I haven't been a part of it. Not interested really in evening meetings. I don't think that they're that productive. And as far as passing things at the board, I wouldn't. I'm just trying to put the perspective around things that happen on different committees, and even though we're voting, just the area directors are voting on things, the full board, we need their support. So if they're not part of the conversation and they have questions, they can pull things out of the consent. But I'm not sure that I understand that they are in support. I guess I need clarification then on our vote from the EA directors at the board level. So I'd like clarification on that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a risk of having the recommendations come from the EA committee on the consent agenda. You lose that ability of the First Nation directors and the other municipalities of having some input. So there's the potential that discussion is reduced at the board table. So it's just something to consider.
Okay. Now I'll have a few questions and answers. One reason I did bring it up is because we are taking time up on Michael, the big board, because there's 14 people there and only 6 of us can actually vote, do what we want. All 14 can participate. So it's tying their time up, and we could lose quorum. And if his board does get bigger, it will be a smaller percentage. Also, if we do it for an EA directors meeting, then we have more autonomy about what we want to talk about, what we want to vote on here. Then we give it to our answers to the board. They can pull it out and they can change it, but it won't be at the will of the EA directors. They've already voted, so they're going against what we would like to do in our area. So it gives us our ability to be able to have a bigger, stronger voice in our areas because we come in as a block of 6 already. I mean, it could be a unified block of 6, but some block of 6. So we have that ability to do that too. So it gives us a little bit more control over what we would like to do in our areas. There probably will be more EA directors meetings because if we want to keep planning going, we have to keep planning moving. So when that is and how that is, I don't know. But the whole idea was to make sure that the 14-member board talks about 14-member problems, which are bigger problems than somebody's put their house too close to a property line in some rural area. So that was the gist of the whole idea. And I think we can do it if we put our heads to it to make it work seamlessly and better. But it's up to us if we want to do it. So, and that's a big thing, right? Because right now we can spend up to an hour talking about little things that don't really matter to most of the board. And I only seen once where they've actually got involved in a conversation. Whether or not they should be able to streamline it through and it should help us because they have their boards, like the city has their council and the bands have their council. And this would be more like our ability to discuss our needs with us. So that was my thought pattern, but I have Director Boyko's hand up, I believe, and I'll let him have his question.
Thank you, Chair. I understand the last couple of arguments, but for planning matters, it's only electoral area directors that vote on it. Are we assuming and hoping that the other people will say their voice and try and sway us either way? Because we don't sit on their boards and do their planning stuff. And we're that's an independent thing that we do. That's the only electoral area director. So I'm trying to figure out where that's coming from. Thank you.
They have the right to discuss it. It's a big board. They can, if it comes up as a planning matter, everybody can talk about it. They can't vote on it, but they have their opinion on it. And they still would the consent agenda. But it'd be harder to say, well, you 6 have already voted on it, and now I want to change your opinion. It'd be a harder push. So you'd end up with more autonomy in your own mind, I guess, not legally though. That makes sense? Okay.
I say that's still a little bit wishy-washy, but yes.
Thank you. Go ahead. Go.
Thank you. So thinking about our planning matters, a lot of them are not that detailed where there needs to be a lot of discussion, in my opinion. So could we streamline it a little bit so that it's for more, like I'm trying to think of rezonings in Sprout Lake area, and there's been a few that have been quite controversial, and but then there's others that it's like just flows right through. So I'm trying to justify having an extra meeting to discuss it, and I'm just not convinced at this point that we really need that, just because most of them are pretty straightforward. Thanks.
Thank you. I have Daniel.
And we're just bringing this forward because it was asked, and so we're creating space for the discussion. The other element of streamlining hasn't been very popular with this board, and things change over time. But the other way to streamline is delegate authority. And so, and the reason that I've heard why board members don't prefer that is that it removes removes another layer of discussion that the community doesn't hear. And instead it's between the approving officer, the planning department, and the applicant. But there are some minor variances and things like that that currently come to the board that wouldn't have to go to the board. That said, there's not a lot. You're probably looking at under 5% of the overall applications that would qualify as being able to increase delegated authority of staff to hand those off. So I would argue, and that's just finger in the air, but knowing what I know, I would argue that there's not enough to say that that would be a big win for efficiency by delegating that additional authority. You'd probably have bigger wins in delegating other authorities in other areas of the agenda rather than on planning. So, but that's the only thing I can think of right now that would streamline it a bit more, is to give staff more delegated authority, which means there's just less coming to the board meeting.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? No? Have we given enough direction to the staff, or we just?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Heather.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's strong support for creating additional EA meetings, and that's fine. We just wanted to have that discussion, and I'll include that in the procedures bylaw. Perhaps, I don't know if there's any discussion needed on like electoral area topics. I know we've got some upcoming discussions on temporary use permit fees, and that seems like a natural fit for this type of meeting. So you can have a further discussion. Is there any other thoughts on topics that you would want to come to EA meetings that we're not currently doing?
I can't think right top of my head. Is any director somebody I think we should come to EA directors meeting as opposed to the big board or the general board? Director Roth, are you?
I just wanted to note that Veda had her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see. Sorry, Veda. We're looking for the yellow hand. And you're waving. There you go. Okay, go ahead. And now you're on mute.
Okay, yeah, I've got my yellow hand up on my screen. No, I have had my hand up not for introducing new items to be considered at the EA meetings. After listening to everybody talk, and I know that some of the other board members get very bored and zone out when we're considering the zoning applications. So my inclination would be to go with option 3, which would be consider the applications in an EA meeting, come forward with recommendations, and then have a consent agenda in case there is other input. But I'm also concerned about, I'm not wanting to increase the number of EA meetings. So, but like for this meeting, for example, we could probably have considered a few zoning applications in this meeting. Yeah. Not sure.
Thank you. Can I make a suggestion? Could we have a meeting like before a meeting, like 10 a.m. meeting? In some places, there's no cow meeting, then we'd have it the same day. Is that a possibility? Is that just too rushed and crushed? Alex, want to answer that one?
Happy to, yes. Through the chair, that is an option. I mean, there are other areas that hold their EA directors meeting either the same day as the board or the day before the board. It gets a little complicated with the motions. There would be possible motions on the agenda or options to consider, right? But yeah, that is an option. It is still additional meetings, right? It would require that additional meeting. And I would remind the board that there are 20 to 21 board meetings a year where the board can make decisions on planning matters, right? So to to mimic that through an EA discussion would be a significant increase in the number of EA meetings, and unless we change the way that we considered planning matters. So something to think about.
Okay, thank you. Are hybrid meetings a choice? They're doing half of one or some of the other, like some go to the board meeting and some go to an EA meeting, depending on time of the year. You see, not really?
That-
No?
That would become challenging because I think it would become confusing because the board, people will be going like, well, what is it? Is it a consent agenda? Is it not a consent agenda? And when are you discussing it? And I could see some applicants saying, well, I feel maybe you're picking on me because you brought mine into whatever bigger forum and so got the free pass down an easy meeting or God knows what, right? But I think the more we can be consistent with the process and how something's received, the stronger we are in terms of people's perception of how their file is handled. So, I mean, can you? We could. The challenge, it would be like, I think that perception where we'd likely get criticized by people who, particularly people who are unsuccessful with their applications, would likely have a bit of a toehold to say that I was unfairly treated because of this person, even though it's legal. But so I would prefer consistency, but it's completely up to you.
Thank you. Do you, Mike, you have someone, and then I'll go to Director.
I was just going to add around the time. I think it would be important that if we were going to hybrid it, that it would be only that we'd be consistent with the types of applications. So if it was going to be variances dealt with at a EA directors meeting and rezoning applications dealt with at the board, because we get into procedural fairness and what Daniel was mentioning, you know, about perception, but also we need to be very consistent in how we treat each application. So I think if it was a hybrid format, it would be, it would have to, I would recommend it was be split by type of application.
Okay, thank you for that. Director Cote.
Thank you. So, from the staff's, you must have an idea of, through the chair, the staff, that you must have an idea of how many zoning applications come through quarterly. So do we have a number on that? 10 maybe?
We can report back to you. I don't have the number offhand.
Okay. Because if there's some that are a bigger project or more complicated, I think that those should be discussed with the EA directors, and then we won't be dragging it through the board meeting. But there's a lot of them that are just, you know, there's no questions and they just get passed. So I don't want to drag on people's applications by any means. We really need to streamline. But for those more complex rezonings, we should be talking with the EA directors. But how to make that fair for everyone? Any suggestions? As I'd like to know how many, I guess, right off the bat. There are quarterly, so.
So the I think what I'm hearing then, so the more complex applications need more space and time, right? So that is you know, that is something that we can look at when we talk about the hybrid model that Mike was saying, that we could look at referring certain types of applications, the simpler applications, to one meeting, whether that's a board meeting, so that process is slowed up, and then refer the more complex meeting or applications to an EA directors meeting for additional discussion. You know, I think you know, we would want to look at the types of applications, and that might be an OCP amendment as well. That would be the most complex rezoning application we have, would be the ones that are associated with a change to the official community plan, and that could be something that we investigate as well. Yeah, so all of these applications do go to the APCs, and we do have, just looking up the numbers right now, I think we had close to 33 APCs last year, or something like that. So we do a significant amount of engagement with the APCs, and they look at all types of the applications right now, whether that's rezoning, OCP amendment, development variance or temporary use permit, and then all of the planning policy work that we do. So
Thank you. That makes things a little more clear for me. So I would like to see us, if we could, because all the EA directors are invited to the APCs, could we not have that discussion at the APCs rather than another EA directors meeting? Because it's just adding another meeting, and the last thing any of us want is another meeting. Thank you.
I'll go to Mike, and I see Director Roth has a hand up and Director Boyko, but I will go to Mike first and then Director Roth.
Well, I think that's a good idea. The legislation's very specific around if you're wanting to have motions come out. So there's as directors, they're sitting there as observers or guests, and the recommendation is specifically coming from the APC members to the area director to bring back to the board. So it would have to be structured. Now, hearing what the APC members have to say and all of that, I think is very important. But as far as the EA directors having an EA meeting at an APC meeting, I think legally we would start running into problems.
And time to action comments. So what happens as well is that an APC may mention, oh, you know, that you're missing this, you're missing that, or we have questions that weren't answered tonight. Typically, having that window of space between meetings allows a proponent to get that information provided to staff, and then the board gets a complete picture. So if it was all live in the same moment, I think you would miss that opportunity.
Okay, Director Roth, thank you for your patience.
Thank you. So I'm thinking, whatever we decide, can we put a 6-month trial and then come back to it and intentionally discuss it again? So we're not tied to something that doesn't work well?
I think they'll get back to you on that in the next meeting when they research it. By looking at the people in the room, they're going to, it maybe, but you mean like a year trial, because, you know, time we get started and get finished will be over, so.
I have such a problem with missing so much time off work. So, you know, when I miss time for a meeting, my work piles up. No one does it for me. So unless it's after hours, it's a big problem for me. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Director Boyko.
Is it okay if I share my screen? Because I have something from another area that's very relevant to our conversation right now. And it'll take 10 seconds. Is that okay?
Sure. See how it goes.
See what is on my screen right now. Cowichan Valley Regional District planning.
Yep, it's a lot of small print, but we can see it.
Small print. I'll zoom in a little bit. Okay, so here, something like what we have now, where you can click on and look at actual applications in each electoral area. We have something like that now. But something like Director Cote was just saying, if you look on the right-hand side here, let me move over. Major development applications. So click on this and it will bring up major development applications in each area. Now, I don't know how they classify what is a major development application and what makes it like that. But if I click on one, just a random one here, it goes into a whole bunch of detail of blah, 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 this application. What I really like, and I really love, is this little thing on the side here. It says the 13 steps, where it is right now and what's happening. I love that. And if you were an applicant, that'd make your life a lot easier rather than have to call the planning department. But this does exist and we can do this, but how do we qualify what's a major one, what's a minor one? I don't know how we would do that. But there's one thing about talking about this in an advisory planning committee. The meeting is recorded, but it doesn't exist in YouTube later on for future reference and for other directors, and the minutes are not shared. So until we get to that point, we need to make sure that we're talking with this. Any planning stuff that we're voting on, doing motions, has to be public and recorded. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel, you had your hand up.
So that's an excellent example. Thank you. And it is something that we can add to discussion. in terms of defining the type of applications and where they go at that point. So we would have to define what we qualify as a major application, and then have a process whereby it goes to EA first on those before going to the board. And in establishing the schedule for EA meetings, or for all meetings, I know that that's going to be a discussion that we have in terms of how rigid or how flexible we are in our procedures bylaw. Our bylaw can say that there's going to be a mix of meetings, within certain windows at certain frequencies. It doesn't have to prescribe that it's going to be, every third Tuesday at 10 o'clock. It could say once a month daytime, once a month evening, between these windows. And ultimately, annually, we would fill the blanks and agree on the schedule for the year. And I'm bringing that up because what you could do is identify that, there'll be 4 pre-established EA meetings for major project applications that will be used if and when needed, but here are the days. And if they're not required, then they're simply canceled. And so that way, the point of these schedules is for the public to understand what the rules are for meetings, so that they're not hoodwinked out of, I didn't know my application was even up for discussion, and I didn't even know that there was meetings on Saturday. Like there would be things that you want to make sure you're establishing annually, but we could loosen the rules, is my point, or the prescription is my point of how and when those meetings occur to give you more flexibility. You just have to make a decision once a year, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Director Cote.
Thank you. So extra meetings, would directors be compensated for that, and what would the cost be in the end?
I think I'll refer that one to Heather. She's looking at.
Yes, you would be compensated for every ACRD meeting that you attend. That's per the remuneration bylaw. Yep, times 6. So there's definitely a cost, and definitely a delay in planning applications, the lengths to review them.
Okay, thank you. And the next follow-up? Go ahead.
Follow up. And would we have any money in the budget to do that?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I'd have to look.
So we do have an approved budget, and we do have some built-in contingency, but obviously depending on the volume and frequency, we would have to do an exact calculation and make sure that we're in the right window. If we weren't able to, then it's something that we would recommend for 2026, and we'd follow as best we can this year. So that's the best I can answer, because we've locked down certain windows, right? And in terms of our budget.
Okay. Well, I got one more question regarding this one. So, time we get finished all this bylaw review, it'll probably be in the fall sometime, the way we're going, because so then there'll be much time left in this financial calendar year, but it'll be next year. And I have Director Sega's hand up, or no? Oh, it's up? No, it's not up?
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I just kind of like the further to this discussion and what you're saying now is, yeah, no, I was just thinking that some of the board meetings are really, really long, and if members of the board that are not EA directors can't vote on it, do we really need to present it to them all? But now it's become clear it has to be presented to the whole board for any of the zoning changes and bylaws. So yeah, I think status quo now. Sorry.
Okay, thank you for that. But we could do a lot on the EA director's new consent agenda and keep the other board free to do other things. There are 3 options, so there's a lot of grants, and it's what we want to do. So, anyway, okay, Director Cote.
Thank you. So Tofino is part of the planning matters as well. So would they be also invited, or?
Certainly on matters where Tofino has a vote. So any zoning that applies to the entire zoning bylaw or any zoning that applies specifically to the Clackamas Sound region, we would need to provide space for them to participate, and that's likely at a regular board meeting.
So they wouldn't be included in the conversation earlier then?
Well, we would have to look at options for that. I mean, there is, you know, if we were looking at the major developments are referred to an EA discussion, and one of those impacts the Clackamas Sound area, you know, we could look at options of inviting Tofino to participate in that. I think at the end of the day, as long as the voting happens at the board table where the participants are able to participate in that vote, that would be what we want to make sure occurs. But certainly we would want them to be a part of the discussion if they're making a decision on that. So I think it makes sense to invite them early on for sure.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, they don't get a vote, do they? If this involves them at the planning table, they get a vote, or they don't? They do, so it's 6+1 in some cases. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Any more questions? Dr. Cote.
Thank you. That's broadening my thoughts here. What about First Nations? Because this is their traditional land and it can affect them. And we do when we go through the ticks. Thanks.
I think Daniel will answer this one.
Sure. Yeah, that is an excellent point. I mean, where some applications require consultation, then we do formal outreaches for consultation. So that, you know, just ultimately to explain that one, like there's the Big C consultation, those have to go over as direct referrals to the nations. We are having different discussions with different nations, treaty and non-treaty, in terms of how best to at least keep open lines of communication. Because in some cases, the applications don't require a legal referral, but are of great interest in terms of their location and the history of the land. And we want to respect that. And we also want to respect the fact that our structure was created 60 some odd years ago, at a time when there was virtually no recognition of title and rights, or at least nowhere near what we recognize today. And so it is a period of change. So your point is excellent. We don't have a solution right now. We're sort of working with each nation. The only thing that is consistent is capital C consultation, where it is required by law, is actually a separate send out, and we usually do that prior to taking it back to the board.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any more questions from directors? Seeing none. Was somebody, Susan, do you have your hand up? I'm sorry. Red Director.
That's okay. I just wanted to say that, like, what I see is because of our different governance structures ourselves, like we've got municipalities, we've got First Nations, we've got electoral areas, it doesn't work well together. So we do have to figure this out. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Heather, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just would like to ask for some direction. So we've been kind of all over the board. Would you like us to investigate or what? Yeah, like, do you want us to consider what type of major applications could be brought to electoral area directors to sort of narrow it down to potential applications, or do you want to provide us a different direction?
Okay, we'll look at that. And do we think we're going in the right direction by putting this to a separate EA board, or do we want to keep consent? So any thoughts from the directors? Director Cote, go ahead.
Thank you. I would like to hear from staff on what they would consider a major rezoning, and that could be directed to an EA specific EA directors meeting. But I'm not really keen on doing them all. So I guess the motion would be to, or the recommendation would be to ask staff to determine what a major rezoning is. I'd also like to know what the cost is. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'll have Alex answer that.
Thank you, through the chair. That would be my suggestion as well, that as staff, we take this away and we put some thought into what a major development would look like, what criteria that we could come up with that would define what that is, and then bring that back to this committee at the next meeting for more discussion. And in that, we can include some of the financial impacts as well. But that would be my recommendation, that we look at the idea of the major developments. We consider the timelines of how that application review would be impacted by this change, and then some financial impacts as well. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I have Director Boyko now.
Thank you very much. I agree with the direction that Director Cote is going here. We need to figure out, A, if this is worthwhile spending more time on major project, what is a major project, and define it. Costs are important, but we got to make sure that we're including staff costs as well as having 6 or 7 directors in there as well. It's also noted that we're talking about things for Tofino, and Tofino's not even in this meeting. So we have to make sure that we're going to reach out to them as well. Thank you.
Are you seconding the motion?
I'll gladly second the motion.
Thank you. We have a motion on the floor and seconded. Any more discussion? I'll get Dan to add something. I'll add something.
I will reach out to Tofino to just better understand where they're going as well. Based on the budget discussions this year, I don't want to bring us down what is potentially a moot point if they are truly pulling out of rural planning. It sounded like they wanted to cut costs and pull out, but we didn't receive formal notice. So I'll push on that front and better understand, because if they're not part of the discussion in the future, then there's no point in looking to accommodate today.
Yeah, thank you. I have Director Roth.
Could you please reread the motion so I know what we're voting on? Thanks.
Thank you. We're going to get to that. I was saying the idea behind doing this was to take away from the major boards so we can get more discussions like we're doing right now. Imagine there's 9 more people sitting around watching their emails and doing that kind of stuff. So the idea was to pull it away so we could have discussions on all areas and give us more autonomy in our areas. But if people want to go a different direction, that's fine too. But Heather, can you read the motion?
Yeah, it's a little rough, but that the electoral areas direct staff to investigate the criteria for a major project to be reviewed at an electoral area directors committee meeting, including a cost estimate for staff and directors.
Thank you. And we're going to pursue the other parts, or are we going to let them just stop that and go back to the regular board? So, are we going to, when you had that slideshow about doing this consent agenda, is that going to go forward, or is that going to be stopped now?
That doesn't need to be decided right now. If we do go ahead with reviewing major projects at an electoral area committee meeting, we can also include that discussion whether that should be on a consent agenda or not. We will have certain items on a consent agenda going forward, including like adoption of minutes, that type of thing on the board meetings.
Thank you for that. Well, there's a motion on the floor. Any more discussion on the motion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion? Okay, and opposed? No. So that motion is carried. Thank you for that. And now we're down to late business. No late business. Question period. Any questions?
Sure, just give me a second to look at my emails here.
Okay, we'll look to the emails, and they're on Teams now, so it'll be interesting.
Yeah, highly unlikely. There's nobody in the audience.
There's nobody in the audience.
And there's no emails received.
There's no emails received. All right, so now down to, Dr. Cote, go ahead. What's that?
Move adjournment?
Okay, you beat me to it. Do we have a seconder? There we go, seconder. All those in favor? Meeting adjourned. I thank you for your time. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon. Get out, enjoy some sunlight, and great conversations. Talk to you later. Bye.